In this podcast episode, historian Robert Lyman delves into the complexities of the Pacific War during World War II, challenging the conventional narrative that often begins with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Lyman emphasizes that this event was merely a small part of a much larger story, one that had been unfolding since Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. He argues that the attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a spontaneous act of aggression, but a calculated move by Japan to secure its imperial ambitions in Southeast Asia, which had been thwarted by American support for China. Lyman explains that Japan's motivations for war were deeply rooted in its desire to create an empire and assert its dominance in Asia. By 1941, Japan had been engaged in a protracted conflict in China, struggling to achieve its political goals. The United States, through its support for China and the imposition of economic sanctions, particularly an oil embargo, became a significant obstacle to Japan's ambitions. Lyman posits that Japan's decision to attack Pearl Harbor was a desperate attempt to eliminate this threat and secure the resources it needed to sustain its military endeavors. The Japanese military mindset, influenced by a culture of exceptionalism and a feudal past, viewed war as a means of expressing national identity and honor. This militaristic ethos, combined with a belief in racial superiority, led Japan to underestimate the resolve and capabilities of its adversaries, particularly the United States. Lyman highlights that Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was not only a strategic blunder, but also a reflection of its internal weaknesses and miscalculations. Lyman emphasizes that the Pacific War was a truly global conflict, involving not just the United States and Japan, but also a diverse array of nations and peoples. He points out that while the Western narrative often focuses on the American and British experiences, the contributions of countries like India and various African nations are frequently overlooked. For instance, Lyman notes that the Indian Army played a crucial role in the fight against Japan, with many Indian soldiers volunteering to defend their homeland from what they perceived as an existential threat. This broader perspective reveals that the war was not merely a clash of empires, but a struggle for identity and autonomy among various nations. Lyman argues that the motivations of these diverse groups were often complex and intertwined with their own national aspirations, challenging the simplistic view of colonial subjects as passive participants in the war. The discussion also touches on the British Empire's response to the Japanese threat. Lyman explains that Britain was caught off guard by the rapid Japanese advances in Southeast Asia, particularly the fall of Singapore in February 1942, which marked a significant blow to British imperial prestige. The British had been preoccupied with the war in Europe and failed to adequately prepare for the possibility of a Japanese invasion. Despite this initial setback, Lyman highlights the resilience of the British and Indian forces in the subsequent campaigns in Burma and the Pacific. He underscores the importance of understanding the contributions of Indian soldiers, who formed a significant portion of the fighting forces in the region. The narrative of the war in the Pacific, therefore, must include the perspectives and experiences of those who fought on behalf of the British Empire, as well as the motivations that drove them to do so. One of the most contentious topics discussed is the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lyman argues that this decision was not made lightly. It was driven by the desire to bring a swift end to the war and prevent further loss of life. He contends that the Japanese military culture, which glorified death over surrender, made it imperative for the United States to find a way to compel Japan to capitulate. Lyman emphasizes that the bombings were part of a broader military strategy aimed at hastening Japan's surrender. He refutes the notion that the bombings were simply acts of vengeance or a demonstration of power, arguing instead that they were seen as necessary to avoid a protracted and bloody invasion of the Japanese mainland, which could have resulted in millions of casualties on both sides. As the conversation shifts to contemporary issues, Lyman draws parallels between the historical context of World War II and current geopolitical tensions, particularly regarding Russia and Ukraine. He warns against the tendency to view adversaries through a lens of rationality that aligns with Western values, suggesting that such an approach can lead to miscalculations and misunderstandings. Lyman advocates for a nuanced understanding of international conflicts, emphasizing the importance of recognizing the motivations and historical contexts that shape the actions of nations. He argues that, much like in the past, the resolution of modern conflicts will require a willingness to engage in dialogue and negotiation, rather than a singular focus on military victory.